just one of those things where I felt like I could get away with it during COVID. My hair was really long for a while, and I've had one haircut this entire time. And I just thought, if I don't like it, I can grow it all back, and for the most part, nobody would ever realize. Robin was nervous about it. My better half, she was kind of thinking that I might look younger than she does, which we all that I do now. So this is
so you're doing the opposite. So everyone else is growing COVID beards, and you're saying no.
Yeah, well, I mean, I had the goatee thing, and it's the grayest part of me. Like, it's absolutely the grayest. So losing that was good. But my hair was kind of getting out of control. For my Bronco video, actually, it was outside, it was bright. I had longer hair and I had sunglasses on, and everybody said that I looked like Javier Bardem from No Country for Old Men in the comments. And I mean, everybody, like hundreds of upvotes, and that video got literally 1 million views. And the number one comment, if you look at it, it's like, this guy looks just like the No Country for Old Men guy, which is hilarious.
So maybe it's a career move.
Perhaps.
Paul, you didn't do the grow the beard thing then.
You know what? I thought about it, and I gave it a few days, but I can't get through that really itchy phase where you just want to tear your face off. So I gave up. I had 2 goes, actually, and I gave up on both occasions. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because, men typically like to grow a beard because it's just less of a hassle shaving. But if you want, a beard that's not totally unkempt, it's probably more work than shaving.
Well, you remember we had Lindsay on last week who grew a beard, and he said it was more upkeep to have his beard than it was before.
Yeah.
Lindsay Brooke?
Yeah.
Yes.
I haven't seen him with the full beard. I'll have to.
Here we go, guys.
Great.
This is Autoline After Hours with John McElroy and Gary Vasilash. Episode 519 for July 30th of 2020, Ford Bronco, designing an icon without going retro. Watch Autoline After Hours live at Autoline.tv every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 12 p.m. Pacific. You can subscribe to this podcast for free by searching for Autoline in iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, your journey, our passion, and by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Gary, you're out there. How you doing?
I am, John. Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. This show, man, what can I say? It's always a blast to do.
And it occurs to me that while, we're in this horrible, horrible pandemic situation, one of the good things is that we've had a show consistently. With the exception of the 4th of July break, we've been going straight through, which I think is nice.
Yeah, we get to pat ourselves on the back, and Katie and Carmen behind the scenes here can do the same thing.
Absolutely. So I believe it was last week when I was talking about this day in history, and I said, at some point, I wonder what it'll be said about this period. I would submit that today is a day that will go down in history with the NASA launching the Mars 2020 project, which includes the Perseverance, a 6-wheeled plutonium-powered rover vehicle that will be landing on Mars in mid-February. And I just think that this is extraordinary. I think this is one of the coolest motor vehicles of all time. And plus, there's a little helicopter that goes along, so it'll be the first time there'll be flight on a different planet, which is also very cool.
Yeah, no, I love what you're talking about there. Plutonium. Who needs electrons or hydrogen when you got plutonium?
Yeah, I was just wondering if God forbid the rocket had crashed into the ocean, I imagine they'd have to get after that rather quickly to get the plutonium out of there.
Yeah, well, it's not the first time they sent up a nuclear reactor in a spacecraft, so I'm sure they got plans B, C, and D in case anything goes wrong.
Yeah, I bet you're right. Bet you're right.
Hey, let's bring in our journalist colleague, Chris Paukert from Roadshow. In fact, he's not just from any Roadshow. He's from Roadshow by CNET.
Hey, thanks very much, guys. Great to be back.
Good to see
Good
you.
to have you, Chris. Yeah.
How you been enduring this period of pandemic?
Keeping strangely busy, busier than ever, actually, work-wise, in part for one of the reasons we're here to talk today about the Bronco. That's kept me mighty busy.
Well,
Good busy.
Yeah, good busy. And speaking of that, let's bring in Paul Wraith, the chief designer on Bronco. We may as well start talking about it. But Paul, thanks for joining us on the show.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I mean, there's a million things that we want to ask you, but let's start off with the title of the show that, we came up with today, Ford Bronco, Designing an Icon Without Going Retro. And I got to believe that was one of the things that you guys talked about, because I personally know designers don't like being accused of doing a retro design.
That's absolutely correct. No, we didn't want to design a retro vehicle. We wanted to design the right vehicle for the people that we were hoping are going to buy it, and executing it in a way which makes a lot of sense. Of course, we were interested in reminding ourselves of a period of the Bronco's history, and we were pretty studious in making sure that we understood the key elements that we wanted to bring forwards. But yeah, we stretched ourselves in every direction, from pretty stretchy designs through to a bandwidth of others. But we ended up where we are, and so far, people seem to quite like it.
Paul, had there ever been a consideration that you wouldn't go for, more of the square proportions, and that you guys would do something more like a Land Rover Evoque?
No, definitely not. You listen to that little
Simple
instinct.
enough.
Yeah, you listen to that little instinctive voice, and you know the right way to go. That was not, I think, in any of the doodles that we created. In fact, the drawings that we started with were quite unconventional. We didn't do the normal car design sketch stuff, the big sketches with beautiful colors and everything looking very sort of slick and swoopy. From an appearance point of view, we started off by really analyzing problems and storyboarding days in the lives of the 5 people that we were designing for. And it was odd, actually, the aesthetic of the vehicle began to appear in drawings just like this, and we were able to go from illustrations like this straight into CAD and virtual reality. So here there's Anthony's actually sketching around telling a story. And this is a Nia's sketch, and he's again telling a tale about a moment where the vehicle's passing through the hands of family members. The dad's handing off the vehicle to the daughter. She's going off to college. In our storytelling, she's having fun with her mates here. And actually, it was through picturing those moments that we created this sort of rich imagery, and we were able to draw down those ideas and turn them into 3D data really fast.
Has that storyboarding process been done before at Ford, or was this just a new idea because you were approaching this in a different way?
I think it's pretty new. And I think the time's right for it as well. Throughout my career, I've tackled projects in all sorts of different ways, but it just felt like the right thing to do. Ford's got a really defined and very, very efficient process that really works on quality and timeliness and speed. But I think we all kind of realized that we needed to do things a bit differently to squeeze enough Bronco into the process and actually get out of the initial research the right amount of depth, so that when we went into the more advanced stages, we'd got these ideas together. And we had 5 customers to design for. Normally the process, you've got a sort of notional idea of this person that you're designing for, the target customer, as we might call them. And they tend to be a bit of a nebulous amalgamation of facts and statistics and volumes and numbers and profiles, and we put them together and give them a name. But in this particular case, the 5 people we're designing for, 5, not 1, they're actually real people, and we'd really spend time with them. So we had a lot of sense of what they wanted. I would liken it to, we're all guys, it's the day before Christmas. You're standing in the shop. You're trying to buy a present for that person. You've got two things in your hand. The clock's ticking. It's nearly 5 o'clock, and you're not quite sure which one to get. And you just instinctively know that one or the other is the right thing to do. So I think we were drawing in those initial phases, little presents for the customer of the future. And it was quite a different process.
Paul, is that the first time oh, sorry. Is this the first time that you've used these storyboard approaches at Ford? And as a follow-up to that too, how does drawing these scenarios help you narrow down the design of the vehicle that you want?
I think it is pretty much the first time that we've followed this approach. And it was a fun approach.
Is somebody typing? We're getting some typing noise coming through here. Sorry, Paul, go ahead.
So your question was, is it the first time we used the storyboarding? Yes. And the second part of your question was, sorry, what? John?
And the second part was, how does storyboarding these different scenarios, out camping and doing things with the vehicle, help you narrow down the design that you want to go with?
Actually, I think it helped us explode the range of ideas that we were going to go with. I think, and that really helped with the digital process that we immediately leapt into. So normally in the car industry, you do lots of imagery ideas, a bandwidth of potential designs, and then you get into making models of things, and they're typically things like scale clay models, very much an industry standard. We didn't do that. We skipped that completely. That wasn't what we needed to do at all. There's a limit to how many scale clay models you can make, and in fact, I think we started off with 19 full CAD models, interactive interior, exterior models that we could put the goggles on, the VR goggles on, and go and play with and sit in and see out of. And we learned a great deal from that. So that initial phase generated vast amounts of data. And actually the issue for us was then saying, well, hang on, we've come to the conclusion that the ideal component, whatever, for this particular customer is not really going to work for that other extreme customer on our bandwidth. So what are we going to do about that? That was an interesting conundrum.
Paul, you said that these were real people. Were these real people who were on the Bronco team, or were they real people who are out somewhere in the country?
Real people out there in the country, and very different in their profile as well. One of them, a young woman, she lived in the city, whereas we had a much older guy who was really into the community of off-roading and Bronco, and then we had another guy who was his story was on the edge. I mean, he's a real extreme off-road driver. So when you had this breadth of people and the sort of the experience of learning from their life experience and seeing what they've done to their own vehicles and how they go about their day-to-day business, and then I guess the skill of critical thinking is then going, is that really working out okay? Is that really the ideal outcome? And then you start. That gets you going, and you start noodling away at it and start scratching away at it and go, well, you know what? If if this driver is short, how are they going to get stuff on the roof? And you start thinking through little problems like that. Well, the reality is, we all struggle a little bit, but can we make things a bit better? That's where the storyboarding began to play out these potential solutions that were, following an unconventional path, but I think really valid.
So I know you didn't want to be slavishly retro, but I think it's important, obviously, to acknowledge Bronco has a long lineage, and you've done that, I think, pretty masterfully. But what were the key elements in order to do that from previous designs? Is it one-piece grill or a swage line, or what is it that really those elements that you decided were necessary that you could bring to this vehicle?
Yeah, I mean, there was several generations of Bronco. I think we all collectively had a sense that the right one was the first generation vehicle. In fact, that's the truest Bronco. And then you analyze the vehicle in a number of different ways, but just in terms of appearance, we'd break the appearance of that vehicle down into its single piece grille, with lights inside it, and then those lights bisected with a single line. I mean, nobody does grills like that any longer. The lights are always sort of hanging outside somewhere. So that was in itself an unusual thing to try and bring back and then repurpose, reprofile. The swage line down the side, the original vehicle had that. We didn't bring it back simply because of that. But, you know, we also wanted to make the doors really slim. They had to be safe. They needed to package all the kind of good stuff that we're going to put into them, but we needed to make those doors nice and flat. And actually, sheet metal doesn't want to be flat. Sheet metal wants to do all sorts of different things, right? So adding a swage line through the metal is an effective way of making the metal stable. And therefore you can make the door sort of more robust as a result. The single piece tail lights, they just got a perfect rationale. You know, we don't need redundant lights and decorative light elements on a swing gate. We put the lights vertically because that's the best place for them to be in terms of practical use and also meeting all the legal zones. Then the fenders have got the peaks at the front. We thought that was a really cool feature from the original vehicle. It was there on the Mustang as a sort of styling flourish, but on the Bronco, those peaks, they told you where the corner of the truck was. Just brilliant. So let's do something with that. Let's bring those back and then and play those out through a different way. The general profile, of course, is very much a two-box vehicle with its, you know, level belt line and upright windshield. You know, all of those things are very practical. You know, if you want really great visibility forwards, and of course you do in your off-road, definitely, you know, an upright A-pillar makes all the sense in the world. You don't want the belt line rising towards the rear, because when you look over your shoulder, you can't see out of the vehicle. It's, you know, when you start to break down the functional criteria, you end up with a vehicle that has got this sort of slightly nostalgic sort of form factor, but it's all there for good reason, as is the short overhangs and the great, you know, breakover angles and so on. So it was an amalgam of, you know, graphic elements and sculptural elements from the original vehicle that we brought forwards, overlaid with all of the practical architectural elements that, you know, it was going to make the Bronco be, you know, this great off-road vehicle.
And Paul, you mentioned that you guys went to CAD very quickly and did a VR, but you also did some rather innovative mock-ups using more fundamental materials than one would expect car designers to use. Talk about that.
Yeah, that's right. So we did go into VR, into a very, very quick digital modeling, but then we'd arrived at a point where we had all of these proposals in, and we needed to get into 3D. Now, what normally happens in the car industry is you would make clay models, full-size clay models. As when you go into full size, it would be a clay model. But that only gives you the exterior appearance, and this vehicle is a very interactive inside-outside entity. So our first model that we built was made out of this packing material for speed, and so that's an unusual process. But it meant that we could produce a property that we could get in and out of and play with in this way. Here we've got Marty gazing on at what we did. I'm going to tell you a little story about this picture, but this is our very first model that we made, and it's credit to our shops, our workshops. They work to such an amazing standard. I mean, it's phenomenal. Nothing but perfection is perfect, you know, is ideal for them. And I said to them, look, I want to make a model, and I want to be able to get in it, and I want to make it out of packing material. And as soon as we've made it, I want to chop it up. And we had meeting after meeting with them going, but surely you'll want to do, you want to put clay on it. And I was like, I don't want to put clay on it. This is what I want to do. And I think they were very patient with me, and they came along and they did exactly what I wanted. But the great advantage of having this thing was that we could stand on it, jump on it, cut into it, attach things to it, experiment. And in that particular instance there, after having driven our health and safety people slightly crazy, I wanted the vehicle tipped over at an angle so we could at least begin to reflect the sort of circumstance of using an off-road vehicle off-road. Every design studio, car design studio in the world is exactly the same. The floor is perfectly flat. The models are placed on steel plates in the floor that are absolutely perfectly flat. They're all lined up in a row, and they sit underneath strip lights so that we can analyze the surfaces, the contour lines that the lights throw on the shiny surfaces. Well, the world isn't flat. The wild doesn't obey those rules. So how do we sort of simulate the experience of being off-road? And what we noticed some of our designers doing was they were creating instrument panels, for example, that had depressions to put things in. And we were saying, but really, when you're at a precipitous angle, are you sure everything's going to stay in there? Yeah, it's going to be fine. So actually, we tipped the model up. We put the cell phone in the depression on the instrument panel, and it sailed out of the window. And that led to then, well, here's a problem. Let's try and fix it. So the fix to that was then ultimately has led to this a number of features actually, but also the bar that we can attach to our instrument panel of the Bronco that will enable the customers to fit items to it across the top of the instrument panel and keep everything in place. But that was also really helpful to help work out how we were going to do the grab handles, the contact points, so that when the vehicle's over an angle, how do you get in and out of it? The sight lines, what do you see out of? Is the door in a convenient place? Is the belt line too high or is it too low? We could play all these stories out. In fact, we made lots of bits and pieces to add to the model accordingly. The wealth of knowledge that you then get back from that is incredible. It's a brilliant process. You might wonder why we didn't take the model out into the wild, of course, but of course they're top secret, and I would have loved to have taken that model and stuck it in the landscape somewhere, but no way. So we had to do the best we could in the space.
You've talked about how functionality has impacted the design process of some of the interior elements, things like the grab handle and the brought-in device bar. I think the same seems to be true for the outside, and you've basically built kind of a blank canvas or a Lego building block to which customers are probably going to take things off and put things on. How does that impact your design process? You're basically, designing this beautiful thing that somebody else is going to take apart.
It makes it a lot more complicated because you're not just designing the vehicle in its single entity. This is the form that it's going to be in different colors with maybe different wheel sizes. You're thinking through the scenarios of, well, when we've got this bumper or the other bumper or the bumper that follows that or the other ones that the aftermarket might produce. So everything has this very long sequence of some predictable steps and others which are completely unpredictable. You obviously want to execute the vehicle that we're going to produce in the very best possible way, but we also need to set it up in such a way that our customers can personalize it via our channels, but also by the accessory industry in the best possible way. Because when we look, there's no such thing as a standard Bronco any longer. They've all changed. They've all become this other thing. And one of the very first lessons I think that we got was understanding just about the journeys these vehicles had taken through the lives of people that own them. It was the kids' car that became the couple's car, that became the family car, that became these vehicles transformed throughout their lives. And so we were looking at this new vehicle and thinking, okay, how can we set it up in such a way that this vehicle can have that same experience? And so in 30 years time plus, these things, there will be no such thing as a standard new Bronco. They'll all be different. So it makes life very complicated, Chris, but also good fun.
Paul, what's interesting about the design to me is it's rugged, but it doesn't look angry. It doesn't look super macho. Like I said, it looks rugged, but it looks friendly as well. It strikes me that this is a vehicle that could appeal to consumers who otherwise might never consider a 4x4, a serious off-road 4x4, particularly women.
I hope the appeal is for everybody. I don't think we really wanted to make it look angry or intimidating at all. We want to tread lightly in the landscape and not brutalize the landscape into submission. We want the vehicle not to scare people. We don't want it to look, crazy happy, delirious. We need to find that sort of sweet spot. And an element of that is the sort of anthropomorphic quality of it. The cars have eyes, they have a face, and then tuning all those elements in and out just to make sure that you've got the right sort of personality be projected is part of a car designer's stock and trade. I'm pleased that you like it, that you think we've done a good thing.
Paul, I want to follow up on Chris's question a little bit. So you guys designed the doors so they could be taken off, and you designed bags to put the doors in. You've ways to take the windows out and store them, and a number of functions that strike me as being what industrial designers would do rather than vehicle designers would do. And you talked about the problem solving that you looked at. Okay, these are things that we need to take into account. And again, the classic industrial design methodology, not to the car stylists. Did you have industrial designers on your team working on this vehicle?
I think, no, not specifically. I think, car design schools teach a blend of car styling, but they teach industrial design fundamentally. The industry historically has had a very strong sort of styling component to it, but we were really needing just to reach back into our trained skills of industrial design, just industrial design applied to a vehicle. We refer to it as critical thinking. You need to keep analyzing and assessing everything that's going on and working out whether you can make it a little bit better. So the doors are, I think, a really good example on the vehicle because they are technically, engineering-wise, even legally, credibly integrated into the overall vehicle. And then the handling of them into the trunk, the use of the bags, the way that the whole thing, madly complicated. But actually, interestingly enough, it came from analyzing one of those 5 customers. Now, this person didn't say, if you're designing me a Bronco, could you do the following thing? Not at all, because people just get used to how the world is, right? But this particular individual, she was a nanny. She's living in someone else's house. And so we sort of identified a little bit of a tension because by day, of course, she's driving a vehicle. It's got to be a safe vehicle. She's putting somebody else's children in it. But like every nanny on the planet, as soon as they hit 5 o'clock, she's off. The vehicle needs to transform and become this other thing, this play machine and a social space. So taking the doors off was something that we kind of wanted to make quick, really easy. But then we had this sort of, we alighted on the issue of, so where do the doors go? Because she doesn't own a garage. She's got a room in someone else's house. And then we sort of thought, well, if she's moving that quick, maybe they need to, what if we could put them inside the vehicle? Then there's always a place for them to go. Now, in order to do that, you've got to make them small enough to go in the vehicle. And then that took us then to the frameless doors. So the process of removal is you drop the glass down into the door, you swing the door open, and now the door's nice and small. There's a few things we've got to do there. We've got to make the door really slim. So coming back to that comment about putting sniffness into the metal using the design, but also some real efficiencies in how we engineered the doors out. But then, she's not a huge person, so how's she going to go and do this? So we need to carry the weight of the door. First of all, make the door as light as possible. So it's alloy, it's light as we can make it. But then we need to put the right contact points onto the door. We need to make sure that the removal process of the door is really easy. So it's like one tool. The electrical connection to the door doesn't require a degree in electrical engineering. It's just a simple plug. It's no more complicated than taking a socket out of the wall. Okay. The check arm doesn't require a second process to remove because the check arm or the check is built into the door. So that just comes straight off with it. So it's a really simple process. And then the bags came in as a means of not only protecting the door when they're being handled, because we saw lots of scratched up doors from other manufacturers, but also as a way of shouldering the weight of the door and making it easy to manhandle around. So because you can lift it with your hands, but if you can support it equally on your shoulder as well, that makes a much more easy process. So that's one end of that whole kind of process. But the other side of it is, in order to make the doors small enough, we needed to take the mirrors off them, and we needed to put the mirrors onto the body. Now, you could say there's nothing new under the sun about that because old vehicles always had the mirrors on the fender, right? But they didn't have to deal with the legislation that we had to have to deal with. So the legislation on mirrors is extremely detailed and exacting, and you've got to get it right. So one thing is true, the further forward you mount the mirror, either the bigger the mirror needs to become, the further out it needs to go, and that's not ideal for an off-road vehicle. Or the more you've got to tuck the body in, and that's not something we wanted to do either. And then when you look across the inside of the vehicle, you can see we've got the grab handles on the instrument panel. We've placed them there specifically through our learnings about how to hold ourselves into position and how to haul ourselves into the vehicle on uneven ground, and they're getting in the way of the mirror. So, and the mirrors, of course, sit near an A-pillar. The A-pillar's got a structural function to take. My goodness me, the problems. and by scratching away at them, you sort of get down to the point where we've got the legal mirror, we've got all the structure, we've got this tremendously safe roll structure around us, we've got the visibility that we want, we've got the handles in the right position, and now we can take the doors off and we can store them on board the vehicle. So it starts with an insight into one particular person in one particular circumstance, and then you play it out into an entire vehicle with a whole PD organization fixated on achieving something which is completely new, totally original. Fortunately, we kind of got there.
Yeah, you did. Hey, hold it one sec, Chris. We got to take a quick commercial break. Hold that thought. We'll come back from that, and you can jump right into it. But first, a shout out to our good friends at Borg Warner.
The world is changing at an ever-increasing pace. No matter what the mode of transportation, there is always the need for an efficient propulsion system. And that's exactly what Borg Warner has been doing since the earliest days of the automotive industry. We create innovative mobility technologies that reduce energy consumption and emissions while improving performance. Our proven track record has made us an industry leader in forward-looking propulsion solutions for combustion, hybrid, and electric vehicles.
All right, we're back talking all things Bronco with Paul Wraith, the chief design engineer on that. And Chris, I had cut you off. Go ahead.
Thank you. So we jumped right into Bronco for obvious reasons. It's very exciting, but we didn't really hear about your background very much. I know you've been at the company for about 20 years, but this is really your first go around with this type of vehicle, right? And how was that experience for you? Because, certain people design passenger cars all the time, or they design commercial vehicles, but this is a whole different audience that you're dealing with.
You're right. So, one of the wonderful things as a designer working for Ford is that we have such breadth of projects, everything from Le Mans winning supercars through to semi-trucks. And each time you get a new brief, you've really got to get under the skin of that brief and understand what the user needs. And so my background within Ford is quite varied. I've worked on semi-trucks. I spent about 10 years designing commercial vehicles. I've worked on passenger cars. I've done e-bikes. I've done racing cars, rally cars, circuit cars, electric vehicles. I've done all sorts of things. And, we're always very eager all designers are very eager to the next challenge. Getting this challenge, starting this project was absolutely fascinating because it wasn't at the beginning my world, but it became absolutely, totally absorbing and is absolutely my world.
So I thought it was interesting to learn that you designed the second generation Transit Connect, and our friend Peter Horbury designed the first generation Transit Connect.
Yeah, that was a fantastic project. That was one of three actually that I was working on at the time over in Europe. The Connect comes here, but there's also the Custom and the Courier over in Europe. One a little bit bigger, one a little bit smaller. They're really exciting products to design, actually. You'd think not. You think, well, surely commercial vehicles, really? But actually, the owners of those people, or the people who use them, my goodness me, they know their business fantastically well. You can't pull the wool over their eyes. They're about as knowledgeable about their vehicles that a track day driver would be about tire pressures and, sort of differential settings on a supercar. They really know their stuff. And that makes them a great audience to design for. Interestingly, I found, we talked a little bit earlier on about how complicated the Bronco was to design for with all of its interchangeability of parts. Well, actually, commercial vehicles are a bit like that as well. They come in so many different forms, different wheelbases, different heights, different lengths, sliding doors, no sliding doors, windows, no windows. So I find it very exciting, actually, to sort of bring a little bit of those insights into this project. And at those moments where you think to yourself, actually, this is quite intimidating. There's a lot going on here. You think, yeah, but what? Ford's pretty good at this stuff. Let's pull that resource. Let's bring those skills in from elsewhere in the company, and let's make ourselves feel a little bit better about this. Yeah.
Paul,
You used the word intimidation, and I wanted to use that word in my next question, because to me, this whole process of designing an icon all over again, it could be intimidating. it's got different functional requirements. It's got a great history and a rabid fan base of this type of vehicle in general, not just the Bronco, but that other vehicle where you can take the doors off. That one too. Those owners and fans, they're probably more rabid than just about any supercar or muscle car fan you can find. That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, it was a lot of pressure. I won't use the exact expression, but don't mess it up was said quite a lot. And of course, part of our research process is to analyze as much information and data as we can possibly get hold of. And part of that comes from social media and the forums. And we're reading through this stuff, looking at the expectation about what the public thought positively and also, negatively, what we were going to go and do. But what was clear was the level of passion was overwhelming. And it was very motivational. It was also very useful and insightful, actually. We had to grow slightly thick skins along the way, perhaps, but we took it really seriously. And I'm going to assure you, I've said it a few times, but I'll say it again. It is the very first thing that the team think about in the morning, without a doubt. And it is the very last thing that we think about when we're going to go to sleep. And we've been doing that every day for years. And, the whole PD organization took a big brave pill to get on with this vehicle. There was passion to do it, but my goodness me, the ambition, and the determination to see that ambition through to the end was phenomenal, really phenomenal. So it's been a very exciting process and challenging, but challenge is good, right?
It sure is. Paul, when you talk about things like not wanting to do a clay, wanting a mock-up built out of packing material, want to chop it all up, what it sounds like to me is you're talking about this customer-centric design process that Jim Hackett brought to Ford. Is that the case? And is this the first time you've gone through that process? And how would you differentiate it or describe it being differently from the old way of doing things?
I think there is a cadence, a pattern, a typical way that typical things are done. But when you approach an untypical problem, then you, rather than try and squeeze the untypical problem into the typical process, you need to sort of step back and go, what does the process need to be to deal with this untypical situation? And then work around that way. I didn't sit at the beginning of this, or any of us sit at the beginning of this and think, well, let's make packing material vehicles. It's just that we got to a point where we went, the normal process isn't enough. So let's find a different way. And I didn't know, I've never done a model like that before, so I didn't know that was going to be the right solution. We were taking a bit of a punt. But that's okay. You experiment, and if it works out, that was a good thing. And if it didn't, it's fine. Find another way. Keep moving in a different way, and be agile in the process of it. I find it very refreshing. Actually, it was exciting, and we made some big decisions using some very low fidelity properties. In fact, I'll mention this one, but there was a lot of debate about whether we should have a tailgate or a swing gate. And there are pluses and negatives, and many of them for both scenarios. So we actually resolved which way we were going to go by taking a couple of those rough models and parking them back to back in the studio. And we mocked one up like it had a tailgate, and we knocked the other one up like it had a swing gate. And we're talking hinges from Home Depot, right? It's just screwed into things to make them operate. But because they're so lightweight, we couldn't hang spare tires on them, as you'd imagine, because the whole thing would have just collapsed to the ground. So we made really incredibly rough spare tires out of foam core, and the foam core was held together with duct tape, and the whole lot was just screwed into the model. This is all good, but we needed to simulate for a tailgate, like a device to swing the spare tire out of the way. So we did that by using a just a piece of wood with a really rough hinge on it, with foam core wheel suspended on it, on a plank of plywood, with these two vehicles back to back. And what we role played the situation of using the vehicle, and the situation we were describing was, you either reversed into your garage or you're parked in the street. How are you going to put something in the back of your truck? So we played out walking back to the truck with a bag of shopping, except we didn't have any shopping. The only thing we actually had in the studio at that moment was a Ford GT supercar steering wheel. So we were pretending, like you do. So we were pretending that this is our shopping. And then we went through the process of trying to open this, swing the tire out of the way and fold the tailgate down and flip the glass up. And then we tried the alternative approach of just using a swing gate. And it was quite obvious that that was the best solution. And that decision was made at, 8 o'clock at night, one evening, in the studio with the executives, with this silly steering wheel and these rubbish models. But you don't need to make it perfect. What you're trying to get is the truth of the situation and resolve it really, really quickly. We could have spent, we've got the resources and the money to have 3D printed out everything, and it would have looked amazing. It would have been Hollywood. But what was the point? Let's just get to the solution that we need to get to as quickly as possible, make the right decision, and then move on.
Paul, did people from other studios, your colleagues, come in and look to see what you guys were doing and say you're crazy?
A little bit. But designers don't tend to sort of say this is crazy. I think they found it really fascinating, actually. So yeah, they swing by and say hello. We're a tight team, and I think they found it quite energizing. I got, the sort of negative side of it was when we were doing big reviews and made the untypical properties, or we'd made only things in physical form and not digital form, or if it was digital, it was so vast in terms of what we'd created, it didn't fit in any of the drives. So yeah, we had a lot of kind of like wide-eyed, like, what have you done type moments. But ultimately, the leadership of the company was completely on board with this. Designers are intrinsically a little bit chaotic and creative. The system as a whole was just looking for great ideas to move forwards quickly, and our leadership had got this fantastic appetite to be this ambitious. So the ups and downs in between were just collateral. It was all about progress and having fun, actually.
So is this a blueprint now for the way you'll develop future vehicles?
I think there's learnings which are pertinent to other vehicles as we go forwards. But like I say, I think the issue is working out what you think the problem is, and then finding out what the right process might be to delve as closely into that problem as you can do, and then just inventing along the way. Maybe not being quite so straitjacketed about things, but we've got some fantastic tools to play with, from the highest possible level realization software and all of our printing and rapid prototyping equipment that we have, all the way down to just a knife, a cutting board, and some foam core. We can do amazing things.
Paul, I'm curious how you designed the three vehicles. You got the 2- and 4-door off one platform. You've got the Bronco Sport off another platform.
Yep.
Were they done in the same studio? You kept them separate? How'd you work that out?
Yeah, we're done by basically the same team. My overall Bronco team's quite broad. The Sport spent a little bit of time in a different studio, but only briefly, because we were building so many things, we were running out of space. But by and large, they were built together, and that's great. In fact, one of my Bronco designers had a lovely proposal, really nice, Brian. But you know what? It really wanted to be a Sport. So we sat together, and I said, look, I think I love your Bronco, but it really wants to be a Sport. And he was a Sport, and he transferred over onto that vehicle, and we pushed it forward. So yeah, there was a sort of designed-in sense of Bronco that we were bringing to the Sport. It's a terrific little vehicle. I mean, absolutely fantastic. I've had the privilege of driving it on a few occasions, and I'm super impressed with it. It is highly capable. It feels like a big truck, even though it's compact. We did a vast amount of work to try and get the approach and departure angles as aggressive as they could be. The front end is super short. It's got the architecture of Bronco built in. It's got the upright windshield. It's got the very, very level belt line. It's got the commodious rear end. It's got everything's very flat. It's got the simple body side. Everything's really sucked in. Single piece tail lights. The round lights at the front with a bar dividing them. But, when you drive it, it is so robust. It feels like it's made out of iron. It's so tough. And I will admit to not being the greatest, most experienced off-road driver on the planet, but this vehicle makes me look really good. And I'll describe to you. We had some fun with a few of the prototypes. Actually, the whole team, designers, marketeers, and planners. We took some of them around our off-road course at one of our proving grounds, and we actually had a camping weekend. We played out the experience of using one for the weekend in this secret environment, using these secret prototypes. We had a nice evening watching the sun go down around the fire, with a barbecue, with all the tents littered around all over the place. It was fantastic. But the driving aspect was what really opened my eyes. Actually, was following one of our professional test drivers in a leading competitive vehicle, should we say, a Trailhawk version, and getting to the bottom of a intimidating looking climb, and then watching this guy try and go up the climb and then fail, and then have another go and fail. It was slippy, the conditions, it just rained. And he made 2 or 3 attempts at it, and then the walkie-talkie crackled, and he said, "Look, Paul, would you back up? I need to take a run at it." So I backed up, and he took a run at it and got over the top and disappeared. And then the radio crackled again, and he said, "Your turn." And I just thought, God, this is going to be embarrassing. This is going to be humiliating, right? And I just drove straight over one go. And I was being cautious as well. So I felt like a hero when I got to the top, and it reinforced on me the capabilities of the sport. And I've yet to try the Bronco off-road, but I'm sure it's exactly the same. Will enable our customers to access the wild more easily. It should be a less intimidating process. The vehicles have been designed to do it. They're not precious. There's contact surfaces where they should be. The ground clearances, all the attributes should be correct. You should be able to feel confident enough to just keep going. And the journey of driving off-road should be a lot easier than it is normally. I think more than anything else, a sort of higher calling for this is that we want to open up the world to our customers, so they can have these incredible experiences that we know that they're yearning for. And I suspect some of the fantastic response that we've had to the vehicle is I'd like to think is because people are recognizing that in these vehicles there is an object that could do that for them.
I was thinking actually that this is the perfect time for something like this, when we're all sort of, sheltering in place, hunkered down, yearning for the great outdoors, wanting to do something else away from everybody else. You probably couldn't have timed it any better to release, a vehicle that spells out freedom the way that Bronco does, and the great outdoors and all of that.
I would agree. I think there's some luck, if you like. So there's a bit of brightness in an otherwise dark situation. But in any case, I think I sensed, I think we all sensed that the time was right to bring Bronco back. I think it's well known that this isn't the first time that Ford thought about doing it, but the stars aligned, and it was the right time. I think there was going to be a growing appetite from the market, and then we were lucky enough to have all the right technologies, definitely the right ambition, but also the space in our plants to do it and do it really well. And yeah, so fingers crossed. Right vehicle, right time.
Paul, you mentioned Brand X. To what extent did the designers look at what was out there and say, okay, we need to do this, we can't do this, we perhaps ought to try to do this? And what was that benchmarking experience like?
We always benchmark. That's an industry standard. But I think our benchmarking was very broad. It went certainly in terms of it included those vehicles, but it also included speedboats and UTVs. It was very broad, actually. So I think now, can you take examples directly from those vehicles? Absolutely, you can. But why are you looking at speedboats? Well, we're looking at speedboats because the interior of these vehicles, the Bronco in particular, because the roof comes off and the doors come off, it's going to get wet. So how do industries deal with wet fabric and wet electronics? Well, let's go and look at the marine industry. It seems obvious to me. We're not going to find the answer to that by walking into a car dealership down the road. So we were trying to be quite divergent in our thinking, and we learned a lot through the process of it, actually. And then in terms of the other end of spectrum with the sort of UTVs, I mean, they're pretty extreme vehicles, but they're designed for hammering around the desert at high speed. And we're going to be good in the desert, and we're going to be good in the desert at speed. So let's take some lessons from that. What could they do? What could they teach us? And then you take all those lessons and you try and distill them into something which is also going to be great to use every single day of the week. So there's a lot of benchmarking we did, but we absolutely were not going to obsess about brand X or Y or Z. We just needed to do what was right for the vehicle and its use.
Hey, look, we've got to take another quick commercial break right now. We'll come back. We got a lot more yet to talk about Bronco. We've got questions coming in from the audience as well. But first, a shout out to our good friends at Bridgestone. All right, we're back talking with Paul Wraith, the chief designer for Ford Bronco. Paul, one of the things I thought that Ford did that was so smart with the Mustang is design it for export markets. And, a not insignificant chunk of Mustang production now goes outside of North America. Did you look at the same thing with the Bronco? And we got a great question here from Dan Neal, who wants to know, did you ever consider meeting the European NCAP standards for safety with the design that you did?
It's a really good question, actually. The legislative frameworks for different regions are broadly similar, but there are definitely differences. And when you're trying to optimize a vehicle, those differences count for actually a great deal. Bronco's hugely important in the US, but it is actually a lot less well known outside of the US. And so we weren't getting the sense that actually the appetite was as strong in some other markets. And so that in a way was a bit of an enabler, because rather than having to sort of hedge our bets and cover all of these various sort of legal requirements, we could just focus and do exactly the right thing for the Bronco, for this market. But we're a global company, so we're always going to have our eyes wide open to any potential. But in this particular case, I think we made the right decision by bringing the Bronco back, but bringing it back home rather than looking at exports.
I bet you're right that outside of the U.S., it's not as well known as, say, like a Mustang. Once it comes out, my prediction is you're going to find a lot more people overseas wanting to get their hands on it.
Hope so. We're bringing back the brand of Bronco, so we'll be fascinated to see what the response from overseas is. Really excited, actually.
I think, John, you're right on with that. We've seen that already from our readership and from our YouTube commenters, people saying, can I get it in China? Can I bring it, especially to Australia? Hear a lot about Australia, which makes sense given the types of vehicles they have over there. I think there's going to be a lot of demand globally for it. What I wanted to ask you is, you guys are bringing out and making a big deal out of bringing at least 200 plus accessories when the vehicle launches. And personalization is obviously a huge, huge part of this type of vehicle. What has that process been like for you, working with some of the aftermarketers partners that you're with, and how much of that are you guys going to be doing yourself? I mean, you guys have even shown T-shirts and things like that.
What, like this one? Yeah. That was another thing that we did. Well, we were so pleased with the T-shirts, we decided we ought to do some trucks to go with them. Yeah. It's a lot of work. We have a very, very good accessories team who are immersed in that space, and they've got to cover a lot of bases, and we've got a lot of different users. As a manufacturer, we want to produce 200 plus accessories for the Bronco and 100 plus for the Sport, to make to give the buyers the opportunity to make the Bronco that they want as soon as they drive out of the dealership, and if they change their minds, they can come back and get some more. But the relationship with the strategic partners has been very good, and I think the accessories going to provide are going to be seriously useful and expand the role of the vehicle.
Paul, just to give you an idea of the bandwidth of interest for this vehicle, and you're more aware of it than I am, but it's interesting to look at some of the viewer questions that are here. And I'm just going to group some of them together. SubGR77 wants to know if a V8 will fit in there. Big Barney wants to know, when's an electric version coming? Bob Wilson wants to know if you're going to have a PHEV powertrain. And let's see here. Papa wants to know, why can't there be manual transmissions in all of them?
They're brilliant questions. And of course, you know that the answer is always, we cannot comment on things like that. But I tell you what, more than anything else, I'm the designer. I'm not the engineer. I couldn't tell you if a V8 fitted in it whatsoever. So they're comments that we've been seeing online for a good amount of time and in the commentary. And every time a comment like that is made, it's always really helpful to help us understand gauge where the mind of the public is. But I'm definitely not the right person to ask about transmissions.
So Paul, let me ask you a designer question in terms of your colleagues. This is a huge year for Ford. The F-150, the Mustang Mach-E, the Bronco. So you guys are in the product development center. Did you go from studio to studio and sort of have a little internal competition with your colleagues?
You're right. It's a massive year, and the breadth of work that's going on is stupefying. Great fun. Do we pass through the studios and keep an eye on what each other are doing? Yeah, absolutely we do. Do we steal each ideas from each other? I don't think so, actually, because I think we're all very fixated on doing the right thing. You know, in the case of the F-150, Ahab and his team were really fixated on doing exactly the right thing for that vehicle. It's super impressive. And then the Mach-E, again, very, very different product with a real focused team on that one, making sure that they did exactly the right thing for their customers. And then we were doing our thing separately. And I think that's testament. You named 3 vehicle lines, and they're very, very distinct to each other. They've got, there's no Russian doll thing going on here. They're not mini-me's of each other. They are very deliberate, very distinct statements about what those vehicles should be. And I think it's going to make the dealership a really exciting place to be.
We found that over the years that a lot of these projects, when they're in development, get nicknames. The vehicles get nicknames, or individual properties that are being worked on, prototypes get nicknames. Were there any with this program? No. I feel like I'm going to disappoint you by saying that. No, I think we were just talking about the Broncos. I think there was just so much personality in that in the first place that was pretty much enough, actually. We struggle as journalists to distinguish between the two to the audience, to find different ways to talk about them. So there's still the baby Bronco thing, or the big Bronco, or that sort of thing. So I was just curious about that.
Well, internally, of course, we use our very secret code numbers, and of course we don't use those externally. But that will be a shorthand for breaking down which one was which. But we did have a lot of fun working on them. One of the things we had to do was design a new horse, actually, because the old one was really out of date. So in terms of bringing a personality to the vehicle, actually, we were designing the new one at the same time as designing the vehicle. And I'll just tell you this, but we also made one. So the studio that the Broncos were designed in is also the studio where the Mustangs are designed and have been since the 1960s. And at one end of the studio, right down there was a Mustang badge, but made sort of full size, attached to the wall. And we thought, well, we should have one of those. So we designed our horse, and we attached one to our end of the studio, and we stuck it on our wall, but ours is 20% bigger. So that was fun.
It's like the flags at the Korean border.
Well, a little bit healthy competition, that's all.
Paul, earlier in the show, you talked about those peaks on the front hood. And, you mentioned how they really help define the corners, which I find critically important if you're doing real serious off-roading. If you go back in the old days, lots of cars used to have little ornamentation out at the corners there for help in parking situations and the like. And what I found intriguing is not only did you recreate those peaks, you made them functional. They're tie down spots on the front end. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you came to that? And you had mentioned the way that you designed the tray inside so a cell phone wouldn't go out if the vehicle's tipped over. Can you point out a few other little details like that?
Oh, there are several. You're right on the trail site features, so that they are very useful. We've worked on ensuring that they can take a good load, so you can tie off your kayak or canoe to them. That's kind of a helpful feature. So they've got an eyelet through them, so that you can tie things through. But also they've got holes for bolts as well, so that you'll be able to, or the public will be able to attach things to them. Now, what they're going to attach, I don't know. It's up to them because it's their vehicle at that point, and they'll adapt it to their use. So whether it's a camera or an additional light or a flag, for when you're driving in the dunes, we don't know. It's up to them. There are some really neat other features, and just frankly, there are so many of them. Let's talk about the washout floor that we've got. That's kind of fun. We've got rubber flooring as an option in the Bronco Sport and the Bronco, because the doors come off of the Bronco. We assume it's going to get really wet inside. So actually, we've got two options on the rubber flooring. One that has passive drains, so when you drive, the water will just naturally sort of run out. And we also have another with a removable, unscrewable plug in the floor. So when you're hosing the interior out, the water will just go straight out at the bottom. And so we've had to work on making the floor the right shape, so that water flows to it naturally, that you don't end up with a puddle at one end and a dry-looking outlet at the other. So that's an interesting one. You can see in these pictures here, we've also got the grab handles that I mentioned beforehand. But the kind of cool thing is that they're removable. There are little bolt heads on those that all have Bronco bashed into the top of them, and they're there so that the customer can take them off, put a different design on, or I would imagine the aftermarket will be looking at them and thinking, "Gosh, there's a thing that we can do." That was a really fun exercise. The reason why we put Bronco in the head of all of those bolts, by the way, is as essentially as an invitation. Wherever you see one of those on the interior or the exterior of the vehicle, it acts as an invitation to get involved, get the tool out, and you can do this. You can make this vehicle your own. It is up to you to do something with it. But we learned, kind of a really neat little fact that when Ford was producing Jeeps during Second World War, we put an F into the head of the bolts that we assembled them from. So the little nod and a wink back to a little bit of history, and just as a reminder that we've been doing this an awfully long time.
Paul, it sounds like many of the things, the floor shape, the bolts, the grab handles, and the weight of the doors. It sounds very functional, and it sounds as though there had to be a lot of engineering involved. Did you guys work very closely with the engineering team on this?
Yeah. I mean, there is the whole team. The program management team, the engineering community, and all of the different areas of that group, the chassis guy, everything. It's just a unit, all fixated. I have to say, we gave each other a lot of pain, along the way, pushing to do the absolute very best possible thing in every area of the vehicle. So, it could be the best that it could possibly be, it's a passion business, and people are in the industry because they care very much about the subject of car and truck, and they're on the Bronco because they really, really care about that very much. And it's an enthusiast vehicle, and so you've got even more enthusiasm behind it. And then you put all those people in a room together, and they just want to reach for the stars. It was an amazing journey. I'm sure that when I, settle back in an armchair with a big beard and no hair, and think about my career, I will reflect back upon the journey that we collectively have taken as being a real high point. I'm sure I will share that sentiment with my co-workers.
You're coming out of the gates with a bunch of different types of models. They have different focuses. Some of them are a little bit more luxurious. Some of them are a little bit more high-speed off-roading, that sort of thing. How did you determine the usage cases for those? And do you think that the family as it is now will be the size of it going forward, or do you have other things in mind?
So the segment is very broad. And like I said earlier on, from 20-year-old women through to, you know, gnarly guys on the side, hanging off the side of a mountain. I mean, the segment is so massive that we have to do a lot. I think that's reflected in the fact that we've dispensed with the typical series nomenclature. There's no XLTs or titaniums or any of that stuff. We've got location-based series, and then unusually, you know, it isn't like you start. Our typical process for buying a car would be series start with good, and then you get better, and you get the best one. But here, you know, you can mix and match. You can bring packs in, and you can put 35s on the base vehicle. I mean, things like that are just a bit of an unusual proposition. So we can't perfectly preempt what every customer will want from their vehicle, but we'll do our absolute damnedest to do our best possible job at providing as many options as we possibly can. So that's a big step change. By the way, those series, you know, each one has got a very different badge actually that sits on the door or on the front fender, and they were design projects in themselves. You know, you define the names, you define the locations, and then you design these great colored badges. They're all different shapes. They're beautiful pieces of graphic design, and actually they're reflective. You shine a torch across them and they pop when they catch the light. There isn't, I mean, when I mentioned that, and if you reflect back on the comment I made earlier on about the Bolt, you know, this wasn't a big picture sort of execution. There it is, stand back. You know, yeah, it's cool, I think, the Bronco and the Bronco Sport, but as you get closer and closer and closer to it, these details keep unveiling themselves to you. And so I'd like to think that as the vehicles sit in people's lives, they'll keep on finding these things and enjoying these details long into the future.
I'll bet they will. And look, we're going to have to wrap this up at this point, but Paul, what a blast having you on the show. And not nearly as much of a blast it must have been in running this program, the design program for the Broncos. I mean, you know, what an iconic statement, and to be able to do that in your career, what an achievement.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. And we've had a fantastic team of designers who've been totally focused and brilliant leadership. You know, my boss, Maury Callum, he drives an early Bronco himself, you know, and he knows, he really knows. And so it's been a real joy. Now it's you know, this phase for us is over. Now we move forwards, and we'll see them in the hands of the public before long, and we look forward to seeing what happens next.
Real good. Well, thanks again, and Chris Paukert, always good to have you on the show.
Great, thank you so much for the great discussion.
Yeah, and Gary, we'll just keep on doing this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for having tuned in.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, your journey, our passion, and by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Visit our website, Autoline.tv, where you can watch us live Thursday afternoons. Get your daily fix with Autoline Daily and in-depth analysis and interviews with Autoline This Week. There's all that and much more at Autoline.tv.